2 weeks later, the air around the clubhouse was thick with unease. The building itself, once the proud headquarters of the HO board, looked almost ordinary in the early morning light. White stucco, manicured hedges, the kind of suburban architecture that pretended to be more than it was. But behind those glass doors, I could hear the unraveling beginning. Raised voices overlapping, the shrill tone of panic poorly disguised as anger. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, hands in my pockets, watching the ants scurry inside. A few board members arrived in their SUVs, slamming doors and rushing in without greeting one another. No measured superiority in their steps now. Just desperation. It was a small show, but one I'd bought tickets to long ago. The thing about financial systems is that they're brittle. Everyone thinks they're fortified, armored against intrusion. In reality, the armor is paper. The defense is maintained by habit and laziness more than true security. And when you spend 20 years as a forensic accountant, you learn how to follow trails no one else bothers to look for. You learn that when an HOA board funnels money through reserve accounts to pay for steak dinners and golf weekends, those trails are bright as neon to the right eyes. So I'd followed them. Each receipt, each odd transfer, each payment labeled community improvement. That led nowhere. And when I had a picture large enough to cover the walls of a courtroom, I made my move. The first strike was simple: a complaint filed with the state's Financial Regulatory Office, backed by a neat binder of evidence. Then came the second: a few quiet conversations about irregularities, potential fraud, exposure risk. Banks don't like exposure. They act quickly when they sense it. By the time the board members were sipping their first coffees that morning, their accounts were frozen. Reserve funds, operating funds, even the slush accounts tucked under shell LLCs, all locked. The ripple effect was instant. The landscapers who trimmed hedges every Thursday unpaid. The pool cleaners, gone. Securitium's maintenance contracts, all halted. The HOA was a machine, but I had pulled its power source. Inside the clubhouse, the panic was cresting. Through the window, I caught glimpses of faces I knew too well: Margaret, the board president, her lips pinched thin; Greg, the treasurer, shuffling papers with trembling hands; Leonard, who always paraded as the voice of reason, now red-faced and shouting into his phone. They had no idea how quickly it would spread. By the afternoon, homeowners would be calling, furious about trash not being collected, gates malfunctioning, sprinklers failing. By tomorrow, whispers of mismanagement would grow teeth, turning neighbors against them. By next week, lawsuits would start rolling in like storm tides. I crossed the street slowly, as though I had all the time in the world. A few homeowners were lingering near the clubhouse door, trying to piece together why their mighty rulers suddenly looked like cornered rats. Their voices were low, suspicious. They were already asking the right questions. When I stepped inside, the board members noticed me at once. Silence rippled through the room, broken only by the insistent ringing of phones they couldn't bring themselves to answer. You. Margot spat, as though summoning all her authority in that single word. What have you done? I let the question hang in the air, savoring the way it landed. Their eyes were wide, frantic, searching my face for some hint of remorse or hesitation. They found none. I told you, I said calmly, that your threats wouldn't work. Burning my boat doesn't erase numbers in a ledger. It just made me angry enough to act. Greg slammed a fist onto the table, the sound hollow against the cheap wood. You've destroyed this community. Do you understand what you've done? I leaned forward, hands flat on the table, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. No, Greg. You destroyed it the moment you thought the rules didn't apply to you. You torched my property to scare me. But you made one mistake. You underestimated the cost of making an accountant. Vibrated with their fury, but beneath it, I could hear something sharper: fear. Not fear of me, not really. Fear of the residents they'd lorded over for so long, who were now about to see them stripped of their power, their lies laid bare. You won't get away with this, Leonard stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. We'll fix this. We'll sue you. You'll do nothing. I cut in, straightening. Because right now, every homeowner in this subdivision is about to discover you can't even pay to mow the grass. They'll come looking for answers. And when they do, you'll have none. The regulators will ask their questions too, and your paper trails are sloppy. This isn't just frozen accounts. This is fraud. I didn't need to raise my voice. Quiet words carry heavier when the walls are already collapsing. Margaret's hands trembled as she pushed back her chair. For the first time, the queen of the HOA looked small. She was thinking not about her reputation or her pride, but about her own bank account, her house, her freedom. Good. Let her sit with that. I turned and walked out without another word. Behind me, their arguments reignited, louder this time, splintered with desperation. The door swung shut, muting them into background noise. Outside, the homeowners who'd been lingering were watching me closely. One of them, a man in a polo shirt with a skeptical frown, asked, "What's going on in there?" I gave him a thin smile. The beginning of the end. By evening, the revolt had begun. Emails flew through the community chain demanding explanations. The pool stood closed, the trash overflowed at the curb, the gates jammed open, leaving cars exposed. Every small inconvenience that had once been smoothed over by the HOA's machinery was now magnified, glaring, impossible to ignore. And in each angry conversation my name surfaced. First as a rumor, then as fact. I hadn't hidden what I'd done. People needed to know the board wasn't invincible, that the walls could fall. Some looked at me with others with caution, but none with the disdain they'd shown before. By the end of the month, the HOA board had collapsed. Resignations filed under duress. Investigations opened. Homeowners gathered in emergency meetings to pick through the wreckage. The once proud leaders had retreated to lawyers and silence. I never rebuilt the second wind. There was no need. Watching them sink under the weight of their own corruption was a better voyage than any I could have taken across the water. Revenge, I realized, didn't always roar with fire. Sometimes it was colder, sharper. Sometimes it froze everything in its path until nothing could move, nothing could survive. They had set fire to my lad answered with ice. And ice, I discovered, endures. I prefer this response. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood that had once moved with the smug rhythm of control and order sounded different. The neat rows of manicured lawns and pastel condos didn't feel polished anymore. They hummed with agitation, voices rising behind thin walls, arguments spilling onto sidewalks. Something was rotting beneath the surface sheen and I had lit the fuse. The HOA clubhouse loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, a squat building that had always seemed to me like a miniature courthouse. Clean white siding, dark green shutters, an American flag that never had a wrinkle in it. I stood on the sidewalk just far enough away to hear the chaos inside. Through the half-open door came the frantic clatter of phones ringing, chairs scraping, papers being shuffled and slammed. Voices collided, accusations, panicked questions, demands for answers. I let the sound wash over me, a symphony of unraveling. It hadn't taken much. People always think power is rooted in muscle or intimidation, but real power rests in the flow of money. 20 years in financial forensics had taught me to see numbers like rivers, leaving evidence, betraying the hands that thought they controlled them. I'd followed the HO's river easily enough. Past their public checking account, into their slush fund for emergency landscaping, deeper still into the accounts tucked away under the name of a management shell company. They hadn't been smart. They hadn't even been careful. One morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a stack of legal codes, making favors and filing reports in language sharp enough to make regulators sit up and pay attention. By noon, injunctions had been approved. By sunset, every dime the HOA controlled was locked tighter than a bank vault. No withdrawals, no payments, no transfers. Their money sat frozen inert, as useless as a brick at the bottom of a pond. The next day, the first cracks showed. The landscaping crew refused to cut grass without payment. The pool maintenance team padlocked the gates when their check bounced. The security officer, who liked to strut around in a knockoff police uniform, stopped showing up entirely. Without money, the machine stalled. Now 2 weeks later, it wasn't just stalled, it was collapsing. I shifted my weight and leaned against a lamppost, watching homeowners shuffle nervously in and out of the clubhouse. Their faces were different from the ones that had gathered around the dock the night of the fire. That night, they had looked at me with smug amusement, as if I had gotten what I deserved. Tonight, the smugness was gone, replaced by fear and anger, because now it was their world being disrupted. Their lawns overgrown, their trash uncollected, their property values in jeopardy. A man stormed out of the clubhouse, his voice loud enough to cut across the street. $300 a month, and for what? No pool, no security, not even the damn sprinklers working. His wife tugged at his arm, trying to calm him, but he shook her off and jabbed a finger back at the clubhouse. They're thieves, that's what they are. Another couple hurried past me on the sidewalk, whispering heatedly. I heard they can't even pay the insurance premium. The woman hissed. If something happens, we're all liable. Perfect. Through the doorway, I caught sight of the board members themselves. Those smug little tyrants who thought they could run me out. Their faces were pale now, slick with sweat, their voices raised not in authority but in desperation. Papers littered the long oak table where they usually sat in neat rows with their nameplates gleaming. The present, a real estate agent who wore pearl necklaces like armor, was waving a stack of documents at the treasurer. You said the reserves were secure. You said we had liquidity. The treasurer, red-faced and wheezing, stammered something about regulatory holds, compliance issues, investigations. His words tumbled over each other like drunks. He was out of his depth, drowning in a sea of bureaucracy he couldn't navigate. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I lit a cigarette, something I only did in moments like this, and exhaled a stream of smoke into the cool night air. Watching them implode was better than rebuilding any boat. Boats could burn. This was per money. They were losing credibility, authority, the illusion of control. And once those things were gone, you couldn't get them back. One by one, homeowners started turning on them. I could hear snippets of fury. You told us we had reserves. What about the special assessments last year? Where did that money go? My lawyer says you can be personally liable. Every accusation was a knife, and the board sat there bleeding out in front of their kingdom. I stepped a little closer, just enough for one of them to see me through the doorway. It was the secretary, the one who had left the unsigned note under my door. Her eye, and she recognized me, a flash of fear breaking through her mask of indignation. She looked away quickly, as if my gaze alone carried a curse. Good. Let her feel it. The HOA lasted another month, technically. They scrambled, begged, even tried to file an emergency motion to access their accounts. But regulators don't move for begging, and they certainly don't move for people already under suspicion of fraud. By the time they realized how much trouble they were in, lawsuits had started piling up. Contractors sued for non-payment. Homeowners filed claims of mismanagement. The bank even threatened foreclosure on the clubhouse property itself. The great and mighty board fractured under the pressure. The treasurer resigned first, citing health issues. Then the president vanished on an extended vacation, which everyone knew meant she was hiding from process servers. The rest scattered like roaches when the lights come on. And me. I walked the Maria every evening, past the charred skeleton of the second wind, which still sat half, submerged in its slip like a scar that refused to fade. Some nights I thought about rebuilding her. Other nights, I thought about letting her stay there forever, a monument to what happens when people mistake intimidation for power. Because they had torched my boat thinking it would silence me. Instead, it had ignited something else. Something they could never control, never put out. And watching them drown, slowly, in their own arrogance was better than sailing ever was. Do you want me to extend this story into more scenes, like a full novella where the fallout spreads, maybe involving investigations, revenge from surviving board members, or even a court showdown? I prefer this response,